Welcome to BBTV Intelligence Briefing. Today's question: how close is Japan, a country that has banned nuclear weapons by law since 1967, to actually building one? Closer than almost anyone realizes, and the reason isn't a secret program. It's sitting in plain sight, monitored by international inspectors. Somewhere in northern Japan, in storage casks, monitored by international inspectors, sits enough separated plutonium to become one of the largest untapped nuclear arsenals on Earth. 44.4 metric tons of it, as of the most recent count. Not hidden, not smuggled, declared, tracked, and reported to the International Atomic Energy Agency every year, exactly as the rules require. Here's what makes that strange. Japan has had a law on the books since 1967 that says it will never possess, produce, or allow nuclear weapons onto its territory. It signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Its Prime Minister won a Nobel Peace Prize for it. And it is still sitting on one of the largest plutonium stockpiles of any nation on the planet. By the end of this briefing, you'll understand how a country can be legally, publicly, permanently committed to never building a nuclear weapon, while quietly assembling almost everything required to build one anyway. So here's what's actually true and verifiable right now. Japan's declared plutonium stockpile stood at 44.4 metric tons at the end of last year. About 9 tons held domestically, the rest stored abroad in France and the United Kingdom, left over from decades of sending Japanese spent fuel to be reprocessed. That's not a rounding error in the world of nuclear material. It is, by a wide margin, the largest plutonium stockpile held by any state without nuclear weapons. The center of this story is a single facility, the Rokkasho Reprocessing Plant in rural Aomori Prefecture. Rokkasho was designed to reprocess spent nuclear fuel into new plutonium fuel for Japan's civilian reactors. A peaceful fuel cycle, on paper, for a country with almost no domestic uranium of its own. Rokkasho has also been, for most of its existence, functionally dormant. Construction started in 1993. It was supposed to open in 1997. As of recent reporting, its completion date has been pushed back more than 20 times. But in October of last year, the plant received its first uranium feedstock since 2014, a concrete signal that the capability to resume full operations is being reactivated, not abandoned. And when Rokkasho does run at capacity, its numbers are staggering: 8 tons of plutonium a year. Non-proliferation experts estimate that's roughly 2,000 bombs worth of weapons-usable material produced annually by a single civilian facility. To understand why this stockpile exists at all, you have to go back to 1967. Prime Minister Eisaku Sato announced what became known as Japan's 3 non-nuclear principles. The country would not possess, not produce, and not permit nuclear weapons on its territory. The immediate context was political. Sato needed the principles to help secure the return of Okinawa from American administration, where nuclear weapons were widely believed to be stationed. But the deeper context was Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and a public that had zero tolerance for anything resembling a domestic bomb program. Japan signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1970 and ratified it in 1976. In 1974, Sato was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, largely for this exact commitment. On paper, the case was closed. Japan had chosen, formally and permanently, never to go nuclear. At almost the exact same time, Japan was building the industrial infrastructure to reprocess plutonium at scale, justified entirely as civilian energy policy. The logic in the 1970s seemed sound. Japan has almost no domestic fossil fuels or uranium. So a closed fuel cycle that recycles spent reactor fuel into new plutonium-based fuel looked like genuine energy independence. Reprocessing contracts were signed with France and the United Kingdom. Rokkasho was conceived as the domestic answer, so Japan wouldn't need to ship fuel abroad indefinitely. The plan depended on a second piece of technology that was supposed to actually consume the plutonium, the fast breeder reactor. Japan's prototype, called Monju, was meant to burn plutonium fuel and eventually breed more of it than it used, closing the loop entirely. In 1995, Monju suffered a serious sodium coolant fire. It barely operated for the next 2 decades, and after roughly $10 billion in total investment, Japan permanently shut it down in 2016. The reactor that was supposed to use up the plutonium never really worked. The reprocessing plants that were supposed to feed it kept running anyway. Decades of delays, technical setbacks, and a fundamentally sound reactor demand meant the plutonium accumulated far faster than it was ever consumed. The stockpile that exists today isn't the result of a weapons program. It's the leftover math of an energy policy that never fully worked as designed. Here's the part most coverage of this story misses. Japan's nuclear threshold status isn't a secret hedge. It's a byproduct of energy policy that quietly became a strategic asset. Nobel in Tokyo sat down in 1970 and planned to build a plutonium stockpile as a nuclear insurance policy. But once it existed, it started functioning like one, whether officials wanted it to or not. A country that holds 44 tons of separated plutonium, a fully engineered reprocessing plant, and decades of nuclear engineering expertise doesn't need to start a weapons program from scratch if its calculus ever changed. It needs a political decision. The material, the facilities, and the know-how are already there. That is precisely the definition of nuclear latency, sometimes called threshold status, and Japan is widely considered one of the most advanced threshold states in the world, alongside a small handful of other technically capable nations that have chosen for now not to cross that line. The debate over crossing it isn't hypothetical or fringe. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe publicly floated the idea of Japan hosting shared nuclear weapons under a NATO-style arrangement, a suggestion the sitting government quickly distanced itself from, but one that came from one of the most senior political figures in the country's recent history, not a marginal voice. This is also, deliberately or not, a signal. China's state media has explicitly cited Japan's plutonium stockpile, sometimes rounding it up to 5,500 warheads worth, as a warning about Japanese remilitarization. That framing is itself a strategic move, using Japan's own declared IAEA-monitored numbers as propaganda. The stockpile doesn't need to be turned into a single weapon to already be doing strategic work, simply by existing and being publicly known. And the incentive to actually resolve this is weak on every side. Dismantling the reprocessing program means admitting decades of energy policy failed and abandoning sunk investment. Keeping it running preserves an option nobody officially wants to use, but nobody wants to give up either. Ambiguity, in this case, works in Japan's favor. This is where it gets interesting, the part that connects the material to the measurement, to the money, to the geopolitics. Technology. If Rokkasho runs at its designed capacity, it produces roughly 8 tons of plutonium a year, enough, by expert estimate, for around 2,000 weapons annually. That capacity has sat mostly idle for 30 years. Restarting it isn't building new capability. It's switching on capability that already exists. Measurement. Here's the detail almost nobody talks about. The IAEA's safeguards measurements at Rokkasho are estimated to be about 99% accurate. That sounds almost perfect until you do the math on the scale involved. At that accuracy, the margin of error alone is large enough that up to 26 bombs worth of plutonium could theoretically go unaccounted for in a single year, without anyone being able to prove exactly where it went. Not because it's missing, because at this scale, no measurement system is precise enough to rule it out. Economics. In 2025, Japan allocated roughly 17.5 billion yen, more than $100 million, to research explicitly aimed at adapting advanced civilian technologies for potential military use. That's a meaningful increase from just a few years earlier, and it sits in the same blurry space as the reprocessing program itself, civilian-labeled dual use in practice. Intelligence. All of this happens under full IAEA safeguards and complete public disclosure. There's no need for espionage here. Every number in this briefing came from Japan's own government reporting. The hidden system isn't secrecy, it's scale, a stockpile so large that even a near-perfect accounting system leaves room for genuine ambiguity. And that ambiguity does real diplomatic work of its own. It keeps allies reassured by the paperwork while keeping rivals uncertain about exactly how fast the paperwork could stop mattering. This is the hidden layer. Not a weapons program in disguise, but a civilian nuclear infrastructure that grew large enough to function as strategic leverage, measured by a safeguard system that was never built for numbers this big. This isn't just a non-proliferation story. It's a deterrence story playing out in real time across East Asia. Rokkasho's full completion is currently targeted for fiscal year 2026 or 2027, after 3 decades of delay. If it comes online at anything close to designed capacity, Japan's already enormous plutonium stockpile starts growing again, not shrinking. Regional tensions aren't cooling to compensate. China's naval buildup and North Korea's weapons program are both accelerating, which puts real pressure on how credible America's nuclear umbrella over Japan actually feels in Tokyo. Japan has given no public indication it intends to leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty or build a weapon. Every official statement affirms the 3 non-nuclear principles remain intact, but intentions are a policy position. Material and infrastructure are physical facts, and physical facts persist, even if the policy that produced them was never really about weapons at all. What's certain is this. As Rokkasho's dormant capacity comes back online, the gap between Japan's declared nuclear-free identity and its physical breakout potential isn't closing. It's the one number in this entire story that keeps moving in only one direction. Japan isn't building a bomb, but because of decades of energy policy, it no longer needs to start from zero if it ever decided to. That gap between a legal promise made in 1967 and a physical stockpile sitting in Aomori right now is the real story here. This has been BBTV Intelligence Briefing. Stay sharp.